I am a Shoshone woman. My name is lost to time, as are the names of most of us from the early days. But the strength of our people is in things remembered. There we all live and are not forgotten. Many different people have lived on this land. Far to the east, the white man. My people sometimes spoke of the whites, but the people known as Sioux, Hidatsa, Mandan, Blackfoot, Nez Perce had importance. With some we traded and shared our lives, and others we hated as enemies and fought. We Shoshone live here in the mountains, where it is beautiful. The game is more plentiful on the plains, but our tribe is small, so we must take the protection of these hills. One of us, who went from these valleys, and whose name is known beyond the memory of the people, is Sacajawea. I will tell you her story as it is known to the people. Sacajawea and I began life together, and what was new to her was new to me too. There was much to learn. Which plants could we eat? What could we do when our stomachs ached? Where did the forest creatures hide? Which path should we follow to get home? Without knowledge of the land and its secrets, we could not survive. Sacajawea came to know all of these things, and she learned how to speak of them by hand sign as well as by tongue. Of all the things we had to know, none was more important than the ability to identify our enemies. Though we were watchful, our enemies were cunning. We tried to escape. I thought my heart would stop from fear. We were captives of the Hidatsa. I was able to escape. I wanted to help Sacajawea, but we were only 10 years old. What could I do? I thought I would never see my friend again. After many long days, they reached the land of the enemy. How strange they were. Could she survive? Sacajawea waited, watched, and struggled to understand. In time she understood. If she practiced their ways, spoke their language, life would go on. And while she thought often of her Shoshone people, she found friends, laughter, and life. Then, as she reached the age of 14, her life changed again. In the land of the Hidatsa and the Mandan were white men who called themselves French. One of them, Toussaint Charbonneau, a man of 46, bought Sacajawea. She would belong to him and do for him as a woman must. And it happened that at the age of 16, a child growing large in her stomach. More white men came. They called themselves Americans. The two most important ones, Meriwether Lewis and William Clark, said their chief, Thomas Jefferson, had sent them to walk through the land and tell him what they saw, and to follow the river west to the Great Water. They said the Great Father and his people now owned the land. That was funny. Even funnier, they said that in their time of 1803, they had bought it from the French. They must not have meant Charbonneau, because he owned little more than a bad temper. They offered peace, protection from our enemies, and many gifts. Some of the people were angry to be called red children of the Great Father, but it was agreed they could make their camp there for the winter. The land was big enough for all. In that winter of 1805, they hired Charbonneau to go with them as an interpreter. Sacajawea and her baby Pomp would go too. She could help them get the horses they would need from her Shoshone people. Also, men alone would be taken for a war party, but with a woman and child, they would appear peaceful. These white men were different from those she had seen before. Their habits, clothing, and the great dog's cannon, so strange. And their dancing, it was hard not to laugh. And Clark's man, Ben York, he was much admired, this unpainted man with the black skin. The journey up the Missouri River began in April 1805. Lewis and Clark, their 28 men, Charbonneau, Sacajawea, and Pomp, on their way west. For the men, all was unknown. What would they find? The gigantic savages that were said to live there? Great hairy creatures from long ago? Treasure? Everyone was excited, but none more than Sacajawea. She was going home. The land was alive with animals. Lewis and Clark were always collecting and making drawings of all they saw. Sacajawea wondered, why would the Great Father want pictures of such common things? Even the prairie dog had to be examined. They quickly learned that it was better to examine some things from a distance. As the Americans were learning much of the land, they came to know how fortunate they were to have Sacajawea with them. She was proving to be helpful in many ways. It sometimes took many days of struggle and hardship to go even a short distance over the fast water, sand, and fallen trees, but she did not complain. Even when the river ran deep and smooth, it could be dangerous. The wind was sudden and violent. Charbonneau seemed to go crazy with fear. Sacajawea saw their bundles begin to float away. She didn't know what they contained, only that they were important. Because of her, books, instruments, medicine, and trade goods were saved, and, said Lewis and Clark, the value of all they had done or might be able to do. Day after day they fought their way upriver, until in the first month of summer they came to know that a far greater challenge lay ahead. Mountains of a size the white men had never seen before. Could they be crossed? Not without horses. Sacagawea's importance was growing. But before they climbed those heights, the great falls would test their spirit. Here their journey nearly ended. Sacajawea became very sick. They took some of her blood, as was their way, cared for her as well as they could, fearing that she might die. Without her, they wouldn't have horses for the mountains. She had to live. As she battled the fever that gripped her, the others began the climb around the falls. For 30 days they struggled under the burden of their equipment and supplies. Their bodies ached in the heat and rain. Mosquitoes filled their eyes, ears, noses, the sky. They feared the snakes that hid in the rocks and hated the cactus that pierced their moccasins. But by the time they reached the land on the other side of the falls, Sacajawea was strong again, and the land was growing more familiar. Her spirit soared. She was home. Now, where were her people? We knew white men were coming. We were glad to know they were traveling with the woman. Perhaps they didn't want to fight. Then one day, I saw them. Wait, Sacajawea? Could it be? Yes, my friend was alive and home again. Sacajawea told us of her life away from the mountains. She rejoiced at the sight of her brother, Camillawait, now a chief, and cried at the news of her sister's death. She took her sister's son, Basil, as her own. I wondered if she might stay, but her eyes, they saw things I knew I could not understand. Bargaining began for the horses. The Americans offered many things of value, but the people most wanted guns and knives to fight the Blackfeet in the Hidatsa. Trading was slow, and we had to leave for the buffalo hunt. The chief spread the word. We would go the next day. Sacajawea acted quickly. She knew that if the people left before the white men could get all the horses they needed, they would be in danger of dying in the mountains. After much talk, Camillawait delayed the hunt and provided the white men with all they needed. She had made it possible for them to go on. What would my friend's eyes see in a land where no Shoshone had ever gone? Now, in the last month of summer, they had to make their passage before the snow began to fall. It was cold. The snow came early and they ran out of food. The white men ate horse meat and dog, but Sacajawea would not. Some ate candles and drank bear oil. No one would argue the name of these mountains, the Bitter Roots. They found their way into the country of the Nez Perce, who gave them food and friendship. When they were strong again, they built dugout canoes, left their horses with these friendly people, and continued on. There were days when they were hungry, when they had to carry their canoes. But now they were on the Columbia River and nearing their destination. At last, in November 1805, after traveling 4,000 miles, they arrived at the Great Water, the Pacific Ocean. Their happiness was great, but soon it began to disappear in the rain. They named their camp Fort Clatsop after the people who lived in that place. The Clatsops did not use sign language, so there was little communication. Soon suspicion and hard feeling was felt on both sides, and seemed to float over the camp like the clouds. Food went bad, and everything seemed to rot. The men were often sick and anxious to be away from this unhappy place with its fleas and constant rain. Sacajawea and young Pomp were at times the only happiness they could see or feel. For her, there were still things to see and wonder at. The Great Water itself was beyond belief. Then word came about a giant fish lying on the beach. It was 35 paces long. Amazing. In later years, when she told people of the fish, they wouldn't believe such a thing, or about the people who lived in the water. In time, she too was tired of that place and eager to go. They began the journey home in the early spring. The return through the Bitterroot Mountains was hard, but this time it was somehow easier as they walked into summer on their way home. Lewis and Clark returned to their homes in September 1806. They would tell the Great Father of an amazing journey over thousands of miles and of hundreds of plants and animals never before known to the white man. Now their adventures are written down, their names known to all. They are legend. For the people, life went on as before, for a time. Then as more whites came, everything began to be different. Now our names are written, and some memories fade, but not of Sacajawea. Some say she died in 1812 of the stinking fever, but others tell a story of wandering, of how she left Charbonneau to live with the Comanche, cousin to the Shoshone, and raised another family as wife to a chief, of how, when he was killed, she returned to the mountains to live out her days, and of invitations to speak in the councils of the people where she was given much respect. Now there is a stone with her name on it, and a year of passing, 1884. Girl, woman, friend, interpreter, guide, heart of courage and laughter. Is she there? The strength of all people is in things remembered, because there we live and are not forgotten.